20 for the first voyage of the SS Windrush over 70 years ago to Britain. Before I bring in the chair, Grace, to address us, can I just go through just a couple of domestics for today's session? Can I ask you to please be on mute through the session, and also please switch all your cameras and videos off during this presentation, as we have a moving audio presentation that will be presented, and we need everyone to see that. Also, please note that this session will be recorded, so you can let members know that if they have missed this event, they can actually then watch it at a later time. Okay, there'll also be an opportunity for questions later. So thank you very much for joining us today. It will be exciting. We're going to be hearing from a great person, which we will ask Janine to introduce later on. But thank you very much for joining us. And can we just bring in Grace, who's our chair for NBCPA? Thank you very much.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the NBCPA, National Black Crown Prosecution Association, Windrush celebration. My name is Grace Moranfalu, and I'm the chair of the National Black Crown Prosecution Association. The NBCPA was founded 19 years ago, and it's been the NBCPA's purpose and intention to provide support and guidance for our Black, Asian, and minority ethnic colleagues within the Crown Prosecution Service and the wider criminal justice system. Our aim is to promote race equality and diversity within the CPS and the wider civil service, and act as an advocate for a fully inclusive and fair working environment where everybody can thrive. The National Windrush Day takes place on the 22nd of June every year to celebrate the contributions of the Windrush generation and their descendants. This year, we want to combine our Windrush celebrations with a bit of VE Day celebrations as well. So I think you're going to be in for a real treat this morning. So as we go forward, we're going to actually play a video for you. And I'm going to hand over to my colleague, Vittorio, who's going to play a very short video. It's only 5 minutes that gives you a bit of background about the Windrush. But before we can play it, can everybody please switch off your cameras and put yourselves on mute, so this will be possible. Thank you.
Hello everyone, can everyone see this screen? Can you see that, Grace?
Yes, that's fine. Mm-hmm.
Excellent, thank you.
We can't hear any volume on the video.
Hi, Victoria, if we can engage the audio, please. Thank you.
Apologies. Apologies all, here we go.
Arriving in Britain and seeing rows of terraced houses with smoke coming out of the chimneys and thinking they were factories, because the only places in the Caribbean where smoke came out of the chimney was a factory. And most of them had to buy an overcoat. This is my dad behind me. That's my dad in the middle there. And he didn't have an overcoat then, but they would have, first thing they would have done is bought an overcoat because it would have been so bitterly cold for them.
Arrivals at Tilbury. The Empire Windrush brings to Britain 500 Jamaicans. Many are ex-servicemen who know England.
I'd like to ask you, please, are you a single man?
I am a single man. I'm only my mother that is depending on me. And I'm also an ex-serviceman.
You're ex-service, RAF, are you?
RAF. I took a course in Scotland in case making, and I'm desirous of going back there to see if I can further, because I like it very much. And I'm trying to help myself and also help my mom.
even though they were asked to come, local people didn't want them there. There were signs in windows saying no blacks, don't come here, we don't want you here. And so they had to put up a lot of discrimination. He started a group in the late 40s. They released a single that was never really a hit, but it was played on the radio, and it's still played today. For generations it's played. And it's called I Am a Mole and I Live in a Hole. And I know a lot of people of a certain age will remember that song. My dad was the bass voice who sang, I am a mole and I live in a hole. I've had a lot of drinks bought from me because of that. We are getting there. As an actor, I've done something, as people tell me, some incredible things. As a black person, to play Bill Snibson in Me and My Girl, it was an archetypal Cockney character from 1938, to play Fagin, to play, to all intents and purposes, Barry Manilow in Copacabana. You know, I keep doing that. In Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, that's the big one for me. I couldn't believe that. There I am, a black man on stage playing the leading role, Caractacus Potts, and I have 2 children with blonde hair and blue eyes, and my father is Russ Abbott. It doesn't get more diverse than that, does it?
Nina was sleeping in her cot on this farm in this very pretty rural area, and they were woken up by a loud banging on the door at 4 o'clock in the morning, which was part of a deliberate tactic. And the soldiers came in and told them they had half an hour to pack, and then put them on sledges through what was one of the coldest winters ever recorded in Poland. It was about -40 degrees at that time. They were put on sledges, taken to the station, the railway station, where, along with all the villagers from nearby, and in total about 1.5 million Poles all in, they were put in these cattle trucks, rammed so tightly that they couldn't sit down, they had to stand or take turns, and sent off on 1,000-mile journeys to Siberia. Although Yanina was only tiny, she does remember that journey. She remembers the soldiers coming into her house because she was in a cot with bars, and she saw these tall black boots that the Russian soldiers had on. That's a very vivid memory from when she was 3 years old, these tall black shiny boots. Just so happened that the ship that was commissioned to take Yanina and her mum and sister to England was the Windrush. They were taken to an army camp at Barons Cross in Leinster, and what the government had done was it had actually set up army camps all over Britain to receive the military soldiers who had fought in World War II and their families, and quite substantial provision. It set up little Polish communities with Polish schools and hospitals. So it was almost like little bits of Poland all over Britain to allow the Poles to settle and eventually integrate into society here. Being brought up in Britain, the war is very much, or has always been presented to me as a really big triumph with Churchill and the victory parades and the Battle of Britain and Dunkirk, and we liberated Western Europe, and I did not appreciate that Eastern Europe had not been liberated. I thought it was desperately sad that you have the Poles, 100,000 plus troops, fighting with the Allies, thinking that they're going to liberate their country and go home at the end, and they couldn't. So that's actually given me a shiver. I've actually got goosebumps right now thinking about it. So I felt that narrative, that part of the war, is something that really deserves to be in West collective memory, as well as our view of Churchill. There is a Polish Windrush generation, and the Polish community has contributed enormously to this country too. And I wanted to try and use this anniversary, the 70th anniversary, to raise awareness of that.
We had a happy time. We had a really happy time. They had this calypso and they had, providing music. The plan was to come to England, get a good job, work for about 5 years, go back, rear fat children and watch the vineyards grow. But it wasn't to be. Within 5 years, I started a family, married, had bought my house and working hard and settled down. it's disgusting. It shouldn't be happening. Personally, I've had a beautiful life. It's a beautiful family. I'm reasonably good health. I travel every year. America, Jamaica, and other places. Okay? I've had a beautiful life.
Thank you very much for that, Vittorio. And that just gave an insight into 3 stories from individuals who had experiences through their parents or grandparents on that travel to Britain on the Windrush. Okay, so without further ado, I just want to make mention of our DPP who joined the conversation earlier. Thank you very much for joining on to this. Max, do you have anything that you wish to just say for us as NBCPA members?
Conrad, that's so kind of you to include me. Thank you very much. Hi, everybody. Hi, Grace. It's really good to see everyone. The only sadness, Conrad, when the first thing you said was switch your cameras off, is that I haven't been able to see people very much because, you know, now more than ever, using the connectivity that we have through Teams with all our cameras being switched on, it's just great to actually see everybody. But obviously, like everybody else on this call, I'm here to listen to Mr. McFarlane and hear his life's story, which is so fascinating. So really important that we all take time to listen and to reflect. I can tell you that the executive group of the CPS spent an hour earlier this morning in a facilitated session that was led by Sandra Kerr. Many of you may know Sandra. She's the chair of the Business in the Community Race Board. And obviously, we're all of us concerned about what to do, what to say, and what to think during this crucial time of Black Lives Matter. And she was making some powerful recommendations to us on what we should look at and what we should read and what we should see. And one of her recommendations is that we should all watch the BBC film Sitting in Limbo, which of course is about Windrush. So I haven't seen that yet, but I will be going away to see it. But with Sidney McFarlane's words in my ear, which is what I'm really here to listen to. So thank you so much for this opportunity. Always a pleasure to come to any NBCPA event and to see everybody. Sadly, my diary means that I have to leave at 12 o'clock. I'm really sorry about that, but as you can imagine, there's lots going on, but I will be here until the button of 12 o'clock and listen to as much as I can. Thanks, everybody, and let's enjoy this event together.
Thank you so much, Max, for that. It's always good to have that support as well, and from a very senior member of our organisation. It is really important on this fight for justice, as I call it. Now, without further ado, again, we're going to introduce the smiley lady called Janine from East Midlands. Now, she's a CCP of East Midlands, and she's had a lot to do with our speaker today, who will be interviewed, Sidney McFarlane. So we're delighted that she can actually be here to introduce the man himself for today's session. Thank you very much, Janine.
Thank you, and I'm delighted to be here too. Good morning, everyone. And I'm delighted to introduce Sidney McFarlane MBE to those of you that haven't yet had the privilege of getting to know him. Just to give you a little, I hope he doesn't mind, of Sidney's personal background. Sidney was born and raised in Jamaica. He emigrated to England in 1955, and 2 years later he was called up for national service. He then served in the Royal Air Force for 30 years, from being an aircraftman to commissioned officer. And following that, he worked for 12 years at the Ministry of Defence. But after 42 years of exemplary service, Sidney retired in the year 2000. During his RAF career, Sidney was awarded 3 Commanders-in-Chief commendations for outstanding service during tours of duty in the Middle East and with NATO forces in Holland and Germany. Sidney has been just as busy in his retirement And a number of organisations, including CPS, have benefited from his wise counsel for over 20 years. Just to name but a few, Sidney became chair of a social enterprise organisation called Horizon Community Development in 2012. He was chair of the board of independent monitors for HMP Lincoln for 8 years, and he served as a board member for the National Probation Service for 6 years. Sidney has been the national chairman of Marriage Care, which is a relationship education and counselling organisation that has 56 centres across the country. He was chair of the board of directors for Call Advocacy in Lincolnshire and spent 5 years as chair of the Lincolnshire Racial Equality Council. Sidney was a member of the Equality and Diversity Delivery Group under the Lincolnshire Criminal Justice Board and was also the chair of the Lincolnshire Police Independent Advisory Group. And for nearly a decade, Sidney was a member of the Lincolnshire Honours Committee and chair of the Lincolnshire Elders Forum. He's also a non-executive director of one of the Midlands registered social housing providers. In fact, I think it's wider than the Midlands. They are in partnership with over 30 local authorities to provide affordable homes. And he's currently involved with a number of local voluntary organisations, including the University of Lincoln and the International Bomber Command Centre. And so, not surprisingly, Sidney was honoured in 1999 with his MBE for voluntary service to the community and for his service to the Ministry of Defence. And in fact, in addition, in 2011, Sidney was given one of the highest honours that can be bestowed on a non-Catholic by the Pope for his work in support of marriage and family life, which he'd done for almost 2 decades. And the same year, the Jamaican government honoured him with a meritorious badge of honour in recognition of the voluntary service he gave to some of their communities in England. Sidney has 3 sons, he has 2 grandchildren, and in his spare time, and I'm wondering how he has any spare time after that incredible list, Sidney follows sport, and in particular cricket. And he has been a member of the Lincolnshire Orpheus Male Voice Choir for 1/4 of a century. In relation to the CPS, Sidney was instrumental in helping my deputy, who's also on the call listening, Karen Thompson, to set up and chair the first Lincolnshire CPS hate crime scrutiny panel. That was back in the day when we had 43 CPS areas. The Lincolnshire Hate Crime Scrutiny Panel was one of the first in England and Wales, and the panel was often asked to share their good practice. And Sidney was so well known, well respected and involved in the communities locally that he was helpfully able to introduce Karen to a variety of community representatives for our panel. When a few years ago, Lincolnshire CPS became part of East Midlands, Sidney, fortunately for us, was willing and able to be a key member of our CPS East Midlands Hate Crime Scrutiny Panel, which I chair. And over the years, Sidney has made a real difference with his valuable contributions to what I'm sure he'll agree have been lively discussions and robust debate, robust but constructive debate. Sidney's contributions to our panels have really helped us to improve our performance and the way we deliver our services to the communities we serve, and particularly in relation to hate crime and our communications with victims and witnesses. And Sidney's always been a great supporter of social justice and of the CPS. He's pretty much, as you'll gather from what I've said, dedicated his life to making a difference and ensuring that others have improved really positive experiences. And CPS have been a beneficiary of this commitment and his dedication. So from a personal point of view, I would like to say, as I did when I wrote to him a little while ago, it's been a pleasure and a privilege to work with Sidney over the years. He's a true gentleman, and I wish him every success success in the future. And I look forward to hearing even more this morning about him. So I will now hand over and look forward to hearing lots more. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Janine. So we're going to introduce to you now Sidney McFarlane MBE, where I'll ask a series of questions so we can get some insight into this life of this wonderful man as part of the Windrush generation. So can I invite the camera to be open for Sidney McFarlane, please? There is the man.
Good morning. Good morning, everyone.
You may not be to hear people because they're on mute at the moment, but I'm sure behind the scenes they are saying good morning with the loudest of voices.
Yes.
Thank you very much. Okay, so I'm going to ask a series of questions to you, Sidney. I would say, though, I've spoken to Sidney beforehand, and it really inspired me just in the conversation, which is why I think you'll really be intrigued into knowing about the life of Sidney today. And so through the questions, we're going to bring out more in regards to this man who they call Sidney McFarlane. Okay, so Sidney, now, how did you find life over here in England in the early stages? And I know you may want to touch upon, your travel over here initially. So how did you find life when you got here?
Well, just to put things into perspective, really, myself and three colleagues or three friends from Jamaica, youngsters. I was 20, and the other three guys were roughly the same age or a little younger. Decided that we want to come to the mother country to help out. We weren't, as the term used, economic migrants. In fact, we're all employed. So we decided, my parents were against coming to England. They reckoned Europe is a war zone. I would be better off going to the States. So in actual fact, the dates, my passages were booked and everything. My parents weren't told till towards the very end when they had difficulty trying to change anything. Anyway, we came via an Italian liner, and the journey took us to Genoa in Italy, Barcelona, and then to Dover, where we should have boarded a train. We were looking forward to that, to Victoria, but in actual fact, there was a rail strike. This was June 1955. The first thing that impressed me was that 10 o'clock in the evening, it was still light, whereas in the Caribbean, at 6 o'clock, it's dark. So that was quite impressive. Weren't too impressed by not getting the train journey, because I was always quite a fan of train. Anyhow, that's just to give you some background. When we arrived in the UK, I was met by my current wife of 64 years, who had been in England a year before me, and had come up to stay with her, live with her brother in London. So she actually met us at Victoria Station, and we had pre-arranged accommodation. In those days, it was a sort of one-room situation because accommodation was tight. You could not get accommodation in sort of indigenous population property. So you get West Indians who were still here, or those who managed to have a house, you would rent a room. I'll come back onto that later on. Anyway, after about 10 days off, really, I thought I'd go and look job hunting. I work with a firm in Jamaica called Reginald Aitken Limited, who are a British firm, who are manufacturers representative for a number of British companies, including Armstrong Siddeley, Perkins, Diesel, a British oxygen company where I worked. And so I had reference and a personal letter to the managing director at British Oxygen Company at Edmonton. So I felt quite excited and comfortable about the whole thing. Although my other three colleagues were saying, where do we got a job? You're better off, Sidney. You've already got a recommendation, so you should be okay. And of course, they were quite wrong, because armed with the references and personal letter, I went and was interviewed by a personal officer who I thought was quite sympathetic at the end. But initially, a very good interview, I thought. half an hour, 40 minutes. And he said, right, just give us a few minutes. In fact, if you wait about 10 minutes, I'll let you know the outcome. And he went and came back and said, sorry, Mr. McFarlane, we've not had any of your countrymen in the office before. I don't doubt the credibility of your references and everything. I know Reginald can very well come and deal with them. We've not had any of your countrymen in the office before. Things might change later on. However, I've spoken to the foreman, and he's quite happy to have you on the shop floor, and you could work your way up if things changes. I was a cost account clerk in Jamaica, and I've never done any sort of factory work, and I thought I could do a lot better than this, so quite obviously I ignored it. I travelled around, wandered around London, and British Rail was an exportive call who was advertising for booking clerk, and they were offering something like £4 a week. Well, I was getting the equivalent of, I was £6 a week in Jamaica, which is equivalent to about, the economics of the country, 4 or 5 times that. So that wouldn't have paid my rent and sorted out. So, and again, it was shift work. So I left that and hunting, and after numerous job hunting, I wasn't making much progress. And London Transport was crying out for people, and I thought that was perhaps a clean job being a bus conductor. So I became a bus conductor. The irony of it was that before we left Jamaica, the National Health Service, London Transport, were actually in the Caribbean recruiting. And myself and my colleagues all thought, well, we can do better than being on the buses, so we didn't apply. In fact, they were paying fares for many Caribbeans. They were actually bringing them over. So even with that incentive, we thought, no, we could do better than being a bus conductor. Anyway, I joined the bus conducting. The crew was quite welcoming. The local environment was not welcoming. They were sort of hostile. You didn't sort of get beaten up or anything, but just the welcome. So it was a struggle. But the Caribbean community was quite supportive, even though we were very thin on the ground at that time. If we heard of anybody arriving, new arrivals, we would welcome them. And whatever food they've brought up, we'd get together and have our own ding-dong just to have a taste of Caribbean food again. Because, as you can imagine, in the UK, things were still in ration. There were a couple of items still in ration. I think sugar and tea was still in ration. But certainly you didn't see any Caribbean food or anything of that sort. There were no sort of Indian or Chinese takeaway. And so that was a struggle. Don't mention the winter because it was even worse. However, started with London Transport, doing very well, I thought, although I hated shift work. But I thought this is better than anything. And my first reaction was, like I heard on the video this morning, save up for 5 years, earn a fortune and go back. Whereas there were sort of, first time I came across the word WOG, for example, never heard of that in Jamaica. Initially, I thought some of the people are unfriendly, but I thought they need to get you. We need to make ourselves better known. Some of these people are not quite used to us. I didn't see anything as racism. I just thought we're ambassadors from our own country, and we ought to behave ourselves in such a way. So we took a lot of things on the cheek and just press on. And it's only when you start to get various complaints from other colleagues you realize it's more than that. And one of the first incident, my first encounter, in fact, of overt racism was one Sunday morning on the number 30 bus, because I really ought to have put it in context before, really. I would tell you earlier on about the buses. There were 4 of us who went on into training before we became bus conductor. I was reasonably welcomed at Hackney Garage, but one of my mates who went to Camberwell Green Garage, there was a lightning strike. They came out on strike for a few hours because they wouldn't accept him, and they went back to work eventually. So even that was a struggle. I was fortunate, but my mate at Camberwell Green Garage was less fortunate. Anyway, my first real encounter was at on a Sunday morning on the number 30 bus, a lady paying our bus fare. And many of you of my vintage or a little younger will remember that before decimal coinage, minimum fare was 2.5 pence. And this lady paying her fare, getting off at, alighting at the Brompton Oratory Catholic Church opposite Harrods. And she's given her fare and she has her hands so high that one of the penny bounced off onto the floor. Under normal circumstances, the average person would say, sorry, and I'd immediately retrieve it, but she didn't. She went back into her purse, found another penny and paid. This time it didn't bounce off. And as she alighted from the bus and walking towards Brompton Oratory, I sort of shouted a comment of, Madam, your hands wouldn't have changed color had they touched mine. And I thought, given my background, because my faith has been central to my life, and I've been a Catholic, I was an altar boy in Jamaica for years, and my faith was so embedded. The way I dealt with that was there are good and bad, and she's simply a bad Catholic. And that's how I dealt with that one. But the work on the buses in the 2 years were varied. I had another incident, and this time at the other end of the spectrum, a 5-year-old girl and her mom on the bus, came on the bus, went upstairs. When I went up to collect the fare, this young child had a soft toy, teddy bear, which dropped on the floor. I sort of picked it up and handed it to her, and she turned to her mom and says, Mommy, why is he a black man? Mommy did not respond. She didn't say anything to the child. And I just left with the conclusion that this young lady, this young 5-year-old, has been so inculcated with horrible things about black people. And she's wondering, how can he be so kind after what I've heard? But it was never explained to me. What surprised me was Mom didn't say thanks to the gentleman or whatever. There was nothing. But on the opposite side of that, I also had loads of complimentary remarks from time to time, verbal and written. In fact, one instance, the boss at Hackney Garage called me on one occasion and showed me a letter which had been written in by a passenger who had left her handbag on the bus, and it had been handed in, and she'd collected it days after from lost property, and she was impressed that everything was intact, which was to her surprise. But she'd written in to say thank you to the conductor on that bus, whoever found it, and I thought whatever impression she'd had previously of bad, that had changed her mind or in human behavior. But my worst experience was to come when, after a year or so, I was sent my papers to be called up for national service. And that was a shock. Nobody told us about this in Jamaica. And a lot of my colleagues tried various ways of getting out of it. And it was indicated that national service is due to be expired in not too distant future. And it's easy to get out of it. My tactics was to, I've discussed with my girlfriend or my wife that we try and get married before I go in. But I remember my boss in Jamaica saying, if you run into any difficulties in England, just get in touch and come back. But Gwen was saying to me, well, you'll be holding on to them once you do that. She says, you know, national service is due to be applied. What happens if we plan to get married and just postpone it a couple of times? They might forget about you. Well, that didn't work. Some of my colleagues who had similar letters tried different ways of doing it. Some just kept changing addresses and kept moving. And my prospective brother-in-law, my wife's brother-in-law, he actually self-inflicted injury. He fell down the stairs. He allowed himself to fall down the stairs, broke a leg. That's how desperate it was. And obviously he didn't get into the service. He didn't want to go in, but because it was due to be abolished, if you had any complaints of any big nature, and especially medical, they wouldn't look at you. And, you know, I had to register and went for my medical at a place called Wanstead in Essex. After my second postponement of marriage, I tried a third time, and they said, sorry, you've already been deferred twice. You're coming in. So we got married in December. We were hoping to hold on to get married in March of the following year. Because in those days, if you get married towards the end of the tax year, you had all this rebate. But I was pressed on going in, so we got married in December. And, you know, I went in the following year, 56. 1987. Went to a place called Wanstead in Essex where you had your medical aptitude test. Some of my friends tell me that if you fail the aptitude test, they will just throw you out. They have a certain standard. So I went along, and there's a multiple choice questions, and it's very difficult and hard to fail it really, but I did. And I then had to be briefed of which of the services I joined, because I naively thinking, listening to all these rumors, thinking no problems. If you fail it, you get. So I was sat before a chap in Army, Air Force, and Navy in uniform. Right, McFarlane, you didn't do too well in the test, did you? I said, I know. He said, you know? Oh, okay then. He said, what service would you like to join? I says, do I have to? And he says, yes, you have to join one of the 3 services. So I says the RF, because my driver in Jamaica used to take us on to all these various sugar estates to pay people at the end of the month, was an ex-RF guy who would come home, see. So I said, if I have to join in a service with the RF, he says, well, I'm sorry, from your aptitude test results, they're not good enough to join the Royal Air Force. And I says, okay, thank you very much. And I started to get up. He says, sorry, you don't understand. You have to join one of the 3 services. And he says, in the Army, you know, we have sections in the Army where we devise our own tests. You haven't got to take that particular aptitude test. So you probably would have to go into the Pioneer Corps. And I suddenly said, I mean, I nearly changed color. Let's put it to the extreme. And I said, can I beg you to let me sit the test again? He said, yes, I know you could do better. So I reset the test, and the rest is history, as they say. I joined the Royal Air Force. Went to, my first protocol is a place called Cardington in Bedfordshire, where you were tested and kitted out. It used to be a balloon unit. And then thereafter, you went on to recruit training. It's a place called Wimslow in Essex. But there were several recruit training areas. There's Wimslow in Manchester. There's another place in Shropshire, West Kirby, other places. Anyway, and there you do, I think it was 2 months recruit training. And I went in November, and it was tough during the winter months. I think I'll leave you now, Conrad, to sort of take me through some of the questions.
No problem.
Because I could go on forever for a long time. Yeah.
That's fine. That's fine. It's interesting to hear. I'm particularly interested as well in regards to the support that you would have been given whilst you were here. And I know you mentioned about being married as well. So tell me a bit about that, about how it was being in the Royal Air Force and married, and the problems that may have occurred.
Well, initially I thought I would do a lot better in the Air Force. Didn't want to go in the Air Force. I went in kicking and screaming. But having gone in, I thought life will be easier in terms of accommodation and so on. And a year or so after I joined, my wife was expecting our first son, Kevin. We're still living in private accommodation. And obviously, you're eligible for married quarters by being in the service. But the rules in married quarters, for gaining married quarters, are similar to waiting list in civilian life. In other words, you score points for length of service, length of marriage, number of children, and so on. Of course, as a newly married man in the service for 5 minutes, it was out of the question. But what the system, it was the Air Ministry in those days allowed, if you were able to find accommodation, private accommodation, which is suitable, according to certain minimum standards, the Air Ministry would take it over on a contract basis. So if you were posted out during that term of the contract, someone could have accommodation. So following recruit training and trade training, I was stationed at RF Stanmore Park in Middlesex. And as I said, we were living in Hackney, and I said to Gwen, don't worry, I think I'll be able to get some accommodation. I've been told I can find, if I find accommodation, and it's acceptable, the government Air Force will take it over. So this flat was advertised in Seven Sisters Road, those of you who are Londoners. And I rang up the landlord from Stanmore one day, and he said, he was so excited. I said, look, I've seen that 2-bedroom flat advertised. I'm serving in the Royal Air Force. The Air Ministry will take it over as a hiring, and it'll be contracted out for 4 years. If I move on, someone else will move in. And this guy was really excited about all of this, because in those days it was unheard of for a landlord to be able to have that guaranteed tenancy. Anyhow, I got home the evening, borrowed my landlord bicycle, another fellow West Indian who owned a house who live in this room, cycled, turned up in uniform, knocked on the door, called McFarlane, I've come about the flat. He says, it's gone. I said, I know it is. It's been promised to me on the phone. He says, oh, I didn't recognize you. I said, what do you mean? He said, I thought you were one of us. I realized you were West Indian. My accent on the phone wasn't typical Jamaican. So he just thought I was an indigenous population. However, to cut a long story short, he says, look, I'm really, really very sorry. Would love to give you the flat. But I'm one of the signatures to a petition to the local council to get some of your countrymen off the road because their radiograms been too high, and the smell of curry is becoming unbearable. So I didn't get it. I went back to my boss the following morning. A flight lieutenant was explaining the story to him, and he says, we will sort you out. We can find something on compassionate grounds. You won't get a married quarters, but we look for a hiring where someone is going to, because the way the system worked, if you were eligible for married quarters, and you came to the top of the list, but there are no married quarters available, you're offered a hiring. So he said to me, if one of those come up where the chap on the waiting list prefers to wait for married quarters and the hiring is vacant, you could get that. So within a few weeks, I managed to get a hiring in Harrow, Kenton Road in Harrow. Again, so that was my second big encounter. I thought the uniform would have made a difference. But those were the days when you're looking for accommodation and it was common to read in the paper, no blacks, no Jews, no Irish, or cats or dogs wanted. And it was quite an accepted proposition. You have to bear in mind, in those days, there were no anti-discrimination laws. And my view, as I said, and a lot of West Indians was, you're ambassadors from your country. Things will change later on when they get used to us. But I'm sad to say that things hadn't changed. So that was the first episode. But journey within the Air Force, as I said, there was a mixture in the Air Force. You had to sort of manage your career, depending on who you're dealing with. Your timing and your challenges had to be within Queen's regulations and the Manual of Air Force Act. So over the years, during my 30 years, I acted in many cases as mentors to many of our West Indian or they call it Bay minority. And I happened to be, my specialism was human resources. So I had the privilege of seeing annual confidential reports going through the system because I used to process them. And if an injustice is being done, I would try officially, sometimes unofficially, to see the extent to which I might be able to put that right. And also managing your own career plus your family.
Yes. So tell me, I mean, it's really shocking actually just to hear that even in a service uniform, you can still get that type of discrimination. So just going further into your career then, Sidney, were there any further barriers when you joined the RAF in terms of progression or career progression?
Yes, and this was sometimes not policy driven. Some of it was policy driven, some was not policy driven. So for example, I was stationed at one occasion at a place called RF Cullerin in Wiltshire. And there was a system and the silent hours, because the RF, like most of the armed services and the emergency services, is a 24-hour occupation. So during the silent hours, they're very duty personnel. So you'll have orderly officer, orderly sergeant, orderly corporal, fire pickets. You'd have people. So as a young airman, I was on duty. I have a weekly roster for doing due to clock. And it just means that you slept in station headquarters, and any emergency comes up, you would trigger the various alarm to get the various executives out. And so I was, in those days, you did, you work on a Saturday as well. So you Saturday morning. So once a month, they had what they call a command stand down, where you're off from Friday to go home for the weekend, those of us who didn't live in married quarters. So I was on duty clock for a week. And normally you did it for a week and someone else follows on. At the end of my week, the sergeant called me in and he says, have a good weekend, but don't forget that the rules have been changed. And when you come back on Monday, you're on duty clock for the following week. And I says, when was that rule changed? He said, well, it has been changed. Not for you to ask. As a sergeant, I'm telling you, the rule has changed. And I said, well, that's unfair. He said, you'll be relieved of your duty when someone else is posted in of your rank. So I thought, that's not right. Anyhow, I went home that weekend, paid my 13 shillings, it was, from Wiltshire, RF Cullen. Coach takes it to Shepherd's Bush. And I said to my wife, I'm not going back. And she says, you've got to go back, otherwise you're in trouble. You've told me yourself that you could be court-martialed for absence without leave.
That's what
She
wives
said,
do.
absolutely. And the support, it's always so marvelous, really, to have that sort of level of support from someone sane. But I was absolutely mad with the behavior of the sergeant who was driving me on. What I didn't know, it was supposed to be a wind-up. As a West Indian, been in the country a couple of years, not used to some of these local things about wind-up or whatever. So Gwen says, you've got to go back. So she said, there must be someone senior to the sergeant who you can speak to. I says, yes, there's a flight lieutenant. And then when you're on tea orderly, you do the coffees and teas anyway. So when I take him his coffee, I will tell him that I have a problem, I have a grievance. So she says, right. So I went back. And at that point, when I went back on the Monday morning on duty clock, the sergeant should have called me in and said, sorry, McFarlane, it was a wind-up, what we call a wind-up. It was a joke. You're not on duty clock. Someone else is doing it. But he didn't. So when I went to the flight, then Johnston said, sorry, I've got a grievance here. Sit down, McFarlane. What's the problem? And I sat down and explained to him. I says, I'm supposed to be doing some special instructions as part of my exams, promotion exam. Because without the promotion exam, you couldn't move up to the next rank. And I said, I haven't been learning anything, and I've just been told that I should be doing duty clock forever until someone else is posted in. He says, who said that? I said, Sergeant Wickens. And he said, well, when you go back out, would you ask the sergeant to come in? So I went back out and I said to the sergeant that the flight lieutenant wants to see him. Well, when he came back out to me, he says, right, McFarlane, all what you need to learn for your exams are in these books. And he piled a lot of APs are piled out. And he says, you'll get your trade test exam in 2 weeks. Well, he knows that it was difficult to absorb all the information in 2 weeks. But what I did do, I thought this is a challenge, a fantastic challenge. And what I did was the guys who've been on the courses before me, although I didn't want to involuntarily do duty clock, I volunteered to do 2 sets of duty clock. And it means that you're sleeping in SHQ overnight. And in the fortnight, with all the courseworks by people who had done on the formal courses, I passed the exam. And the sergeant says to me, you're a surprise pass. Okay, he was setting me up for the fail. But, you know, you have to manage that. So that was a lesson.
Wow, that's pretty sad.
That was the first instance. That was the first instance. And of course, what I did was immediately I passed the trade test. I asked the flight lieutenant if I could be transferred, because I knew that the sergeant would find some grievances, because it didn't take much for you to step out of the line to be charged with an offence of some sort. So it's quite easy. And the flight lieutenant agreed with me. I said, I feel uncomfortable, sir, having had this sergeant come into you and be dressed down. So can I have a transfer? And I was transferred from Tech Wing, it was called, it was changed later into Engineering Wing. We had, I think, Hastings and Beverly aircraft. And I was transferred from there to Station Headquarters overnight with a different set of guys, different senior NCOs and so on. So you had to sort of somehow manage your career. And I didn't look back from that. I still had struggle at different rank levels, but there were difference in nature. And of course, once you became a senior NCO in the Sergeant's Mess, that's where you start to have a really bit of power. You have power as a corporal, but it really starts as a senior NCO. Where senior NCOs, that's from a sergeant to a warrant officer, it's what we call middle management. And you have a lot of influence, even over junior officers, to be quite honest. When you get a warrant officer, you can guide a junior officer, because you would have been in several years to get to warrant rank. And therefore, in Queen's regulations, junior officers would be foolish not to take the advice from a warrant officer.
Right. Yeah, so that's really good. That's a good success story on how you actually overcame that, even with those barriers placed before you. Just another question, can I ask Sidney? How would you have done things differently? And if there are any regrets? I know you mentioned earlier that you didn't actually come here to stay. And like we heard in the video beforehand, it was people came for 4 or 5 years, get some money through working, then go back to their country. And you're now of age, and you're still here. So tell me a bit about that. Yeah.
Well, I think, there were some fantastic times in the Royal Air Force in terms of, I signed on in dribs and drabs, because even after 5 years, towards the end of a 5-year term, I became a regular. I converted to regular after 3 years. And the reason for that was that my pay went up for the national servicemen from £2.50 a week to £7.50. You got £5 extra for being a married man. Your annual leave went up from 2 weeks to 3 weeks. And also a railway warrant, you're entitled to 2 as a national serviceman, it went up to 3. So there were distinct advantages. And the government at the time was using National Service Act as a recruiting agent. You were being incented because post-war, the manning levels had all dropped tremendously, so there was a big recruiting drive. So financial incentives were also being given. But I wasn't tempted by the financial incentive. I thought, I need to make sure that I want to progress as a career. And the turning point for me came when, at the 5-year point, I was due to come out, and I'd gone into local civilian accommodation. But hostility in civilian life was still at its height. And I thought, I'll be treated in the service a bit better because I'll be able to manage it. Because under the Queen's regulations and the Manual of Air Force Act, people have to behave in a certain fashion. And there are channels of communication. So although civilian life was hostile, and difficulty finding accommodation, and a lot of name calling and problems, services were better. But of course, I was a bit naive really, because we recruit from the indigenous population. And I thought perhaps I would get less racism in the service. I did, but it was still there. But it was and so you had to manage it. But as I said, as you get up to senior ranks, so at the senior NCO level, what was a big turning point for me was becoming a sergeant, by which time my 3 lads were doing very well. And I decided education was the key to a lot of these things. And I thought I'd avail myself of a boarding school education committee, by which time I decided I'm going to do a full career in the Air Force. And I'd sign on for 22 years, which is the minimum age for pension. And my targets then was, if I could become a warrant officer before I'd done my 22 years, to at least go out on a warrant officer's pension, that'd be fantastic. I thought education was the key to a lot of stuff. And if you're in the services, you're going to be traveling around the world. I thought to have the kids have a steady education, if they could be at boarding school. Gwen wasn't really enamored with the boys going off the boarding school, but she accepted it, which turned out very well because I managed to get the 3 of them to university.
Wonderful.
But a big point for me, so even within that rank level where you think you're doing so well, there were still bits with racism. And I'll give you a particular instance where someone who should know better. I mean, I was personal assistant to station commander in Germany, and as you just as personal secretary. And part of the qualifications for that is you've got to be shorthand qualified and so on. And I was stationed at a place called RF Larbrook, where we had 3 squadrons of aircraft, 5,500 people, including servicemen and their families. So the station commander was looking after the whole thing, with, you know, millions of pounds budget, don't carry passengers. So if he was personal assistant, it'd be good because he can simply take up the telephone, rings record office and says, could you send somebody else? This sergeant is no good. And one instance I had with a chap called Group Captain Bedders, he didn't take sugar in his coffee or tea. At that time, I used to take 2 or 3 spoons of sugar. And on one occasion, one of the things you have to do as a PA, when the telephone goes, you have to monitor the call, so you have to listen in. And the deputy commander from RF Germany, an air marshal, I rang up to speak with him, and I switched the phone over. I was about to take his coffee in when the phone went. So I had to put it down and listen to the call. At the end of the call, I took the wrong cup in. I wasn't aware of it until he tasted. And as I was walking out the office, he says, Sergeant, are you trying to poison me?
Yeah.
And I says, no, sir, sorry, I took the wrong cup in. And we had these little gold ring cups from the officers' mess, and they were both the same, you see. So I switched it over, and he said, sorry. So I went home to the evening, and I says to Gwen, I think in these sort of high-powered jobs, you're only allowed one mistake. And I will not make that mistake again. So what if we all try as a family to see what it tastes like having tea and coffee without sugar? And this is where the family support comes in. Gwen said, yes, we'll try it. And the whole family decided to try it, not having sugar in, taking sugar in tea and coffee. And that carried on, this was 1969 time, 68, 69. And the other instance I had at Larbrook was one of the things station commanders do is that arrivals and departures, there's a monthly dining in night in the officers' mess, where the station commander meets new arrivals and also say goodbye to officers who are posted back to the UK or elsewhere. And he doesn't like to meet an officer at a dining in night without the officer having done his new arrival. Everybody has to do a formal arrival. And he was coming in one day. I've been trying to get a particular flight lieutenant who has been on the station 3 weeks. And each time I try to get him for an arrival interview, he's flying. And of course, flying is the tops. That's the whole aim of the organization. And the station commander was coming in from MEC briefing early in the morning, and he'd seen him, and he hadn't seen him before. And as he came into my office, he says, Sarge, who is that flight lieutenant I just passed along the way? And I says, that's Flight Lieutenant Durant, sir. He came to us 3-4 weeks ago from a place called RF Northcotes in Lincolnshire. Oh, why have I not seen him yet? I said, each time I've attempted, sir, I've made 3 or 4 attempts, and he's always flying. His wing commander said he's flying. He says, look, I want him in the office today. Speak to Wing Commander Soel, his squadron commander. I want him in the office today because there's a dining in night at the end of the week, and I'm not looking to say hello to him in the mess before having an arrival. I want to know how he's settled in long before I meet him in it. So I rang this guy up and I says, sir, you know, we've been speaking for 3 weeks. The station commander spotted you this morning and he wants to see you today. He said, oh, I'm flying. I says, I'm told that the wing commander will be asked personally. He said, well, don't ring the wing commander. I'll be up. I said, what time? I says, if you come up in the next half an hour. Well, given that I've been talking to this guy on and off for 3 weeks, and when you come up to station headquarters, it's a long corridor, and there's a wooden nameplate jutting off the door saying, PA to the station commander, Sergeant McFarlane. And as this guy knocked on the door, I stood up and I says, good morning, sir. He says, are you Sergeant McFarlane? And I thought, unless he was not able to read, I says, I am, sir. And the Americans have just landed a man on the moon. This was 1969. And he says, sorry, I didn't mean an offense, sir. Now, this is a flight lieutenant who knows that there's no way I could have been in that job had I not been qualified. And I thought he was tactless, even if he was surprised to see a black face doing a high-powered job. Wow. I thought he was tactless as a commissioned officer in not, you know, expressing his surprise another way.
Yeah.
And he apologized. He kept apologizing. And I said, look, sir, I don't tell tales. I'm not going to be telling the station commander that, you know, you were surprised to see me doing the job. Don't worry about it. But these were instances that happened all the time, and you had to challenge it and confront it in some way or other. You know.
And I think that it's important that we do challenge, and it's this point in time now in the season we're in about challenging such behavior or unacceptable behavior. I think your son is online, because I know you mentioned your children in regards to that. So I don't know if Colin McFarlane, who's an actor, I believe, yes, because you
Yes,
instilled a lot
yes,
in your children and they've all done very well. So I don't know if we can just hear just a little bit from Colin McFarlane if he's still online. I know he joined in earlier on the conversation to just ask you how inspiring your father has been for your success even till now as an actor. Is he still around? No. Can you just briefly then speak about Sydney, about your son Colin McFarlane? And I'm sure you're very proud of him, right?
Yes, Colin, like the other two boys, they went to the Perth School in Cambridge. And we came over from Germany when he had to make a choice either between, they had to make a choice between arts or sciences at a certain age, just before A-levels. So we came over for a parent evening, and we were surprised when Colin said, "I want to be an actor." And we thought, why not law or something like that? We've been looking after you. For up until this point, we've been looking after you, and I'm not thinking or planning to still maintaining you at age 60, because actors never seems to, especially a black actor, you might struggle. And obviously Colin had done his homework and he had a sort of backup plans. And he says, well, look, Mum or Dad, if I don't get on the stage or get on television, I'll go into teaching. So I wanted to, and he actually went to Loughborough University and did a degree in drama. And we became, obviously, his biggest fans in following him around the country. And he's done very well, in fact, very, very successful.
Yes.
But again, you've got to make the kids. But education is the key to most of these things. And you've got to let the children do what they want, providing they're not committing offenses or doing anything illegal, and give them their support. And that's so important. One of the things that's missing from this whole concept is the education bit.
Right.
Because what I couldn't understand when I came to UK is the extent to which slave trade, for example, was in the school curriculum in the Caribbean, yet it was not in the school curriculum in the UK. Although we were under the same Education Act. Up until 1944, we were under the same education system. But the 1944 Education Act in the UK didn't apply to the colonies. So, for example, in the colonies, we still had to pay to go to secondary school. So unless your parents could afford it or you won a scholarship, you left school at 16. So it was a struggle. A lot of my education was done in evening classes and night. And my father was very keen in education. And I used to go to summer school. We were one of few, even though we were quite poor and struggling. My father did tailoring. We were quite keen on education. So my father would make sure we're doing some sort of studies. School holidays, we didn't get full advantage of school holidays. We had to be doing some sort of work towards learning.
Yeah. Well, that is inspiring that you were able to even carry that legacy into your children as well. So can I just ask you a question around that, please, Sidney? And in regards to, what would you advise in regards to pursuing your dreams as a younger person, or someone younger than you, or those who are now in society wanting to kind of pursue careers and having to be a black male in this particular time? Yeah. What would you advise in regards to that?
Well, I said education is the key, but you got to be persistent, not taking no for an answer. You got to develop little strategies of how you progress, and at the same time, reach a hand out to other people who might be struggling and give them the benefit of your advice. I've done that throughout my life in the services, and it's very rewarding actually, because even today I get people ringing me up, or when I do some work for the Jamaican diaspora, emails from people thanking me. I went to an opening ceremony not so long ago of Bama Gate that's been constructed. And this English guy came up to me, he said, retired from the Air Force some time ago, saying, thank you very much for my career. So you have to be prepared to give something back to the community and give some sort of guidance. But if you want to influence or change things, you've got to be part of it. It's all very well staying outside criticizing. If you can be part of it, you've got to join that organization, or at least try to join a sister organization, so you can influence. And it's not just good enough to be sitting on a panel for a tick in the box on a CV. You've got to be making some sort of meaningful contribution which you think might benefit others. And I've done this, and every time I've been on anything, I've done that. For example, during my time as a prison monitor, when I was chair of Lincoln Prison, I introduced a training procedure and became the training officer, because although we had a manual of the prison rules and thing, what we didn't have is a procedural on how you go about your work as a monitor, how you listen to prisoners' complaint and take it forward and create that independence where they want to come to you with their complaints because you're independent. You're so independent of the system, but you're still, although we're there for officers as well as inmates. So for example, when I was on a probation board in Lincolnshire, I was also the diversity officer. And what I did was with HR, we introduced diversity and embedded it within the appraisal system, where every probation officer had to have an element of how he's dealing with the adversary, what contribution he's making to that. And as part of the system, in fact, there was a national competition, and the Lincolnshire Probation Service won an award for that. And as I said, you need to make contribution. When I was a member of Marriage Care, the national organization, again, I visited to get the organization up and running. They were running for a long time, but to get them more democratized, they used to just tap people on the shoulder, and you were selected as board members. I was the first board member who was elected by the general membership.
Okay.
Introduced that to part of the AGM, so that opened up the opportunity for other people. Because up until that point, you were just rung up by somebody and said, "Would you like to join the board?" So we then started to have AGM, although the organization was going for 60 years. And that's the sort of thing. You need to get involved, you need to try to see if you can influence and affect change. Difficult sometimes, but it's talking to your colleagues, the countrymen, and trying to encourage especially your white colleagues, the extent to which they help you to challenge. Because if they kept silent, if they hear an offense, it's rather like the race crime, the race hate crime. To just ignore it or to say, "Oh, I feel sorry for you, Sidney, that shouldn't have happened to you." But you've taken no action, you're in fact condoning it, even though you might not be. So we still have this big problem of unconscious bias. And I just wish we could organize some sort of miniature psychological training for some of our people.
Interesting.
Well, I when we were in Cyprus, you see, and families had been evacuated way back in mid-70s, 76. I had nothing to do, and I started an Open University course, and actually finished with honors degree in psychology, which helped me when I did recruiting. Brilliant. I was a recruiting officer for Lincolnshire at one stage. And because it helps you to see how people behave and why they behave in certain ways and what you can do about it. And that was tremendous. I'm not saying everybody can be psychologists. We're all psychologists, really. It's just that if you have done the course, you're formally trained. Yes. But we do try and build relationships and see how people want. And convert some people and change their ideas. And it's possible.
I believe in that. Yeah.
You got to work at it. You got to work at it.
Totally in that. I mean, and just speaking of someone that you've converted, I think Colin is willing to speak now. He just can't turn his camera on at present. So it's just really to hear about the inspiration.
You want me to turn mine off? Yeah.
You can stay on if you wish.
All right.
Just going to hear Colin's voice. You'll be fine. And Colin, if you can probably touch on how you felt when your father received MBE as well, when he was awarded that. So Colin, are you still on? Unmute your mic for me. Can anyone hear?
Not at the moment.
Not at the moment? Okay. I think he's probably having problems with his microphone. He did send a message to say he's...
Well, Colin did accompany me he was with me at Buckingham Palace.
He did? Okay. How did you feel about receiving an MBE then, Sidney?
That was fantastic. It was because, like most people receive these honors, I had no idea at all this was happening. That was great. But I'll tell you, an even greater honor, to be honest, as Janine mentioned earlier on, was the Bene Memento medal from the Pope.
Okay.
Because of the wider implications for that and the wider community involvement.
Yes, yes.
And saving and relationships and saving marriages and reorganizing the whole thing. That was really quite tremendous. I'll give that a little just above the MBE.
Oh, wow, brilliant.
Well, it's international, you see.
Yes, yeah.
It's international because the Pope is more international, isn't he?
Yes.
Really, to be honest.
Good recognition. I think Colin's mic is unmuted now. Is that correct? Still nothing?
Oh, it's a shame.
Never mind, Colin. Okay, so just kind of winding down now. Can you just tell us about what you're doing now? I was particularly interested because I'm a musician myself and I love singing, and I understand you are part of a choir as well. And along the many things that you're doing, I've seen behind you the accolades and so forth that you have, and presentations and awards and so forth. So let's just tell me what you're doing now.
Well, I'm one of the trustees, directors of the International Bomber Command Centre in Lincolnshire. You must visit it sometimes. This is the Bomber Command live. In fact, there's a website, Digital Archives, where we're memorializing. It's educational reconciliation of all the guys who we lost during the Second World War, which involve. It did include a number of Caribbean pilots and so on and so forth. So it's well worth a visit.
Excellent. I will try that. Yes. And it's a male voice choir you sing a part of now.
Oh yes, yes. We've not been able since the lockdown, of course, but we do meet on Zoom every Tuesday just for a chat to see how everybody is going on. Yes, it's Lincoln Office Male Voice Choir. Joined them in 1996. And we mostly sing for charity. We make a personal contribution ourselves to pay our principals, the director of music, and the accompanist. Right. In fact, our current director of music, in fact, is one of our top tenors, who also directs us at the moment. We've not been very active. We had to cancel 2 or 3 concerts, and it looks as though we might not be doing anything now till next year, because of the risk.
Yes, I understand that.
Most of us are of a certain age, unfortunately. But that's been quite enjoyable, and it's been quite relaxing, because many of these voluntary information things that I do, some was quite taxing. Like, for example, my chairmanship of Longhurst and Havelock Homes. That was quite a taxing job, and so to be able to go and sing and relax and forget about the world for that hour, couple of hours rehearsals.
Always good, always good.
It's a fantastic difference. So our repertoire quite wide. When you have a moment, you could we've got a website.
Yes.
If you pop on there, for example, you could see
I have done from your last request.
Yeah.
Most definitely.
And it's a camaraderie really as well, meeting all different guys. Unfortunately, I've tried desperately to go to, I'm the only black face in the choir.
I understand, yeah.
And I've tried desperately to read it, but I can't get anything up. I keep trying.
Yes, keep on trying. So yeah, as we're winding down, I'm going to actually invite, if you can stay online for me, please, Sidney. I'm going to invite members that are on today and delegates. If you've got any questions at all for Sidney, particularly probably around the Windrush situation, and if you've got any questions, Grace, our chair, will pick those up and highlight questions that have been asked. Is that okay?
Before they all start, yes. Conrad, I would just like to say that had I not been a member of the Royal Air Force, I would have been one of those awful, unfortunate people caught up in Windrush who have been sent home.
Right.
You know, because I had personal problems, which I probably didn't mention to you earlier on, but I had problems with passports. So, for example,
Right.
on my posting to Bahrain, Jamaica just became independent in 1962 when I was posted to RF Bahrain in 63, and I said to the record office, can I travel on my Jamaican passport? Because you have the right to stay, you have dual nationality. Yes, you're right, because you'll have your RF identity card with you, your RF 1250 it was called. Yeah. Anyhow, I got to Bahrain all right, and then coming back, chartered aircraft from Bahrain to Gatwick. We everybody disembarked. I was taken off by a room. I spent nearly an hour whilst an immigration officer did not agree with the validity of the RF 1250 and had to do his own investigation. And it's as though the Home Office and the MOD doesn't speak at all. And so I said to my wife later on, I can see us having problems in future, so we might as well change our citizenship.
Good job you did.
Yes, yeah, because I'd have been caught up in that. But the other big issue that I didn't mention coming to Windrush, although I was good enough to be called up because we were deemed to be, under the National Service Act 1948, you were deemed to be British as a person born here. And that was the reason why it was quite legal to call you up. Yet 18 years later, 19 years, when as a flight sergeant, I was personally selected to join the air attaché staff in Venezuela, because I needed somebody who's either got grown-up children or children at boarding school, because you weren't allowed to take the kids. And you also had to be short-hand qualified. I fit the bill, but was turned down. When I first investigated, I was told that the MOD thinks I'm suitable, but the Foreign Office will not issue you with a UK passport because you're not UK born.
Wow.
Exactly.
Wow.
So you weren't good enough.
Problem we have.
You're good enough to the service, but you weren't good enough to represent the UK abroad.
Yes.
So that's important. So, had I not been in the services, I think I could be either back in Jamaica or I don't know where I would have ended, but certainly I would have been caught up.
That would have been so unfortunate, because what you actually has given here, is been quite exquisite in its form. Someone's asking, did you have a favorite plane that you had? I think let's who's asking that question? Ben Smith. He's saying, I wonder if you might ask what Sydney's favorite plane is and why. He'd love to know. And Colin's back in as well, so you can join now if you wish, Colin. If afterwards, yes. Thanks.
The Lightning aircraft was my favorite.
Lightning aircraft.
Lightning, because of its vertical climb.
Oh, did you hear that, Ben? Lightning was his favorite.
Fighter aircraft.
And you said because of its climb.
Yes, it had a fantastic ability to,
excellent
rate of climb.
Excellent. Okay, so Colin, have you got anything to add?
He's having some trouble, Conrad, at the moment.
The microphone. Okay.
He's having a bit of trouble.
Oh dear. Oh, never mind. So there's anything else from the members that want to ask Sydney at this time? I know there's been a whole load of information, and I think it's been really great and inspiring what you've delivered already. So I think all the questions may have actually been answered. Any more?
Conrad, this is Grace. There's some wonderful comments in the chat.
Yes.
Which I think I'm going to read
Please
it if you don't mind.
Please do.
So, Ben Smith said that your choice of aircraft was fantastic.
Thank you. Yeah.
Sorry about this. My finger slipped, and now it's all. Oh yeah, it was a fantastic choice. Thank you. And then Karen Thompson, who you know very well.
I know Karen very well.
Yes.
How are you, Karen?
Karen, do you want to unmute your mic and speak to Sydney directly if you're still there? Well, maybe she's not there. I'll read what she says.
Yeah.
She says, Sydney, thank you. I will always be grateful for your help with the Lincoln hate crime scrutiny panel all those years ago. But I have to go now. Thank you again for all your support, and today's talk was fascinating.
Brilliant.
And we've got another lady called Inda, who has said, what a fantastic role model you are, Sydney. What is the highlight of your career, and what is the highlight of your life, Sydney? That was the
Okay,
question.
so that's a question. Yes.
Question, yes.
Highlight of your career.
Highlight of the career. There were so many, but you're quite right. I have to say Buckingham Palace was definitely one. And I also had the privilege of being presented to Her Majesty the Queen again during our Jubilee at Burleigh House by the Lord Lieutenant at the time. For my contribution to the county, I was presented to Her Majesty the Queen on the Queen's Jubilee, 60th year on the throne. That was a real high spot.
Brilliant.
We've got a lady called Fatima Morda who says, "Thank you, Sidney. You are such an inspiration, and thank you for sharing your story. Really enjoyed listening to you."
Pleasure.
Has been. Just a couple more, Grace. Yeah.
Well, Michelle from, I think she's from, it said SAGE. I can't really tell which organization. I think it's I think it's the RAF. She's actually pasted a link, I think, to the Lightning aircraft into the chat, so everyone can see what it looks like.
All right. Yes.
Or the link, yes. There was another question I've seen here from Loretta, who's asked about your wife, and did she experience any form of racism on RAF officer amongst other wives?
Yes, yes, she did. And in fact, on one occasion, she came home to me. She put it down as a sort of misunderstanding, or people don't understand it. What it triggered us to do then, this was at a place called, in my early commissioning days, Farlingdales. And she says it was ignorance. She was a member of the Flower Club. No, she was at High Wycombe. Member of the Flower Club, where the ladies volunteered to go in and put all the flowers. And I was during the Falklands War, I was on the Commander-in-Chief staff in the outer office at High Wycombe. And we have regular dining in nights, as I mentioned before. And every 3 months, there was a mixed dining in nights where you take wives. That meant that many officers can't attend. So each section within it was rationed. So each section could only send so many officers. So Gwen was doing the Flower Club, and the conversation came up, are you going to the ladies' dining in night tonight? So Gwen says yes. And this wing commander's wife, which is fairly senior rank, says, well, I'm not going, because my section only allows, where does your husband work? Gwen said, how can you be going and I'm not going? And Gwen says, well, he's on the CNC staff. She says, oh, that probably make a difference.
Wow.
So one of the things we did was, Gwen and I, which I haven't mentioned, it's really started in Germany, and that's why I keep saying education is the key. We used to get West Indian produce, and Gwen would do samples of cooking, and I would give a potted history of the Caribbean islands and give a little bit about the geography and history, including the food. And we did this as a team. And this all stemmed from one of the group captains I worked for, who was squadron commander of 139 Jamaica Squadron. And his wife had never been to Jamaica. And he says, Sarge, would you like to give a talk on the Caribbean? Because Betty don't really know the background. You'll explain it better than I did. And that started in Germany and followed us around the Air Force on several stations where we gave talk about the Caribbean, enlightened people, just make people more aware of what was going on.
Oh, good.
Yes. I've got another question from
Yes.
Oh, it's actually a statement. It's from a lady called Michelle Sage. She's from she says, really, really inspirational. I'm a civil servant in the Ministry of Defense, and it was wonderful to hear your story. You inspire me to keep challenging and try and be more inclusive. You inspire me to do more and take opportunities. That's what Michelle says. Thank you.
Brilliant.
Oh, bless you. Would you be able to, for me, Grace, please just read out the statement from Colin he's just posted on his son, We had problems with the connection and microphone.
Right.
Apparently, he couldn't be heard.
Yes.
So if you could just read out what he had said, that'd be great. And
Yes.
what I'll do, just before that, I just want to express my biggest thanks to you, Sidney, for your inspiration. As a young man myself, not so young anymore, I'm getting up there, but not even as close as you. It has been so inspiring, and it's given me that push to drive even more, even in this situation. So after the sound of my voice, I'm going to hand you over to Grace, who is our chair of NBCPA, who will address and close after she's read Colin McFarlane's statement. Thank you so much, sir.
Well, thank you very much, Conrad. It's been a pleasure. It's been a pleasure to make a contribution.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Colin, thank you. Colin has said, "What a shame. I would love to have contributed, but the mic appears not to be working. I've just finished reading The Windrush Betrayal by Amelia Gentleman. It's upsetting to know that my parents could have been caught up in this awful situation. I will be talking more about it on Twitter, which is the platform I tend to be on most." And he's put his Twitter address in there for anybody who'd like to see it. Unfortunately, it's not scrolling properly. Oh, and I've lost it.
You okay, Grace?
Yeah, if you can find it, my scroll isn't working. I've lost. Okay, here it is. Sorry, everybody, I've got it back again.
Okay.
So he's given his Twitter account. My Twitter address is @ColinMcFarlane. If people would like to follow and chat with me there. Ari Windrush. Thankfully, my father sorted his passport out due to the problems he faced in the RAF. And thankfully, my father always believed in the importance of education. Without education, without the education I was fortunate to have, I would never have ended up in a Batman movie and more. XXX. So that was Colin's message. Sorry, it was a bit stilted there, but my scrolling isn't working properly. Let me put my camera on.
Thanks for that. I know there's been some other questions as well in the chat, and what we'll do, we'll forward those on to Sidney, if you don't mind, Sidney,
yes,
and then answer those questions from the individuals that have been put in the chat. But that's it from me.
No, and I'd like to just round up and say, I think that for me, I'm very grateful, Sidney. It's been a wonderful, very informative event. For me, this event has served to remind me of the hardship that the Windrush generation, people like yourself, Sidney, had to put up with, so we don't have to. We're really thankful to what you had to go through on our behalves.
I'm really very hopeful that this protest, which has gone international, will make a difference, because we've worked so hard. I've worked so hard over the years. Why I joined so many different organizations is to see the extent to which I'm able to influence and change things. And there have been some changes, but they haven't been far enough. So I'm just hopeful that this, what I'm pleased about is the diversity of people, especially indigenous populations, who've now joined the protest and saying, right, something is wrong when these things are happening. It shouldn't, I feel so sad sometimes. And I just wish I was a few years younger to still be as active as I could be.
Thank you, Sidney. I also want to say that I think the Windrush generation for me marked what was the beginning of the great in Great Britain. People like you, Sidney, you've brought an abundance of knowledge, skill, and culture that has undeniably changed the UK forever. The Commonwealth and the multicultural aspect of the UK has made the UK, Great Britain, one of the most popular places on the planet that everyone wants to come here to come and live. And it's because of the contribution of people like Sidney. Sidney
Yeah, you're quite right. And culturally, it's been fantastic. I mean, I'll give you a quick story of one of my next door neighbors at RAF Cranwell in the Air Force, who had been to Singapore and had enjoyed curry and so on. And we've been invited to the party. And she says, "Gwen, do you do curry?" And Gwen says, "Yes." She says, "Could you just do a little bit for us four? The other guests will have a typical English buffet." And Gwen did a curry and took it off, and we all didn't get any. Everybody wanted a drop of it. I mean, and this is, if you then reflect back to this gentleman who said to me, I want to get these people off the street because the curry was unbearable. To having more curry and caramel, complete cultural change over the years, just amazing. Really amazing.
Thank you so much, Sidney. I mean, you personify the human spirit, the strength, resilience. You've survived some extraordinary traumatic events, which have, led to excellence and social enrichment from which we've all benefited. Thank you so much for contributing to this event, for your time and sharing your really, really wonderful and inspiring stories. I'd also like to thank my colleagues who've contributed to this event. Conrad, you've been an excellent host. Thank you so much. And everyone behind the scenes as well. I'd like to thank our senior management team for supporting the event. We've had the director, Max Hill, QC here. We've also had our Chief Executive Officer, Rebecca Lawrence here. We've also had Janine Smith, the Chief Crown Prosecutor for CPS East Midlands, and a multitude of colleagues from around the CPS, and of course our wonderful NBCPA members. I mustn't forget other colleagues from other civil service departments like the MOD. I know there's people from the Ministry of Justice here as well. So thank you so much, everybody, for your contributions to the meeting today. And I'd just like to round up and say thank you, Sidney, so much. And
it's been a pleasure. It's been a pleasure, absolute pleasure.
We'll be making the recording available once it's been downloaded and everything. So thank you so much, everybody.
I must tell you, just in parting, that I've been a contributor. I've got a whole chapter in the University of Lincoln, of which I'm a member of the University Court, is producing a book on my grant contribution to the United Kingdom over the years, and I've got a complete chapter.
Oh, fantastic.
It's just gone to the publishers.
That is wonderful. You've got to make sure you let us know so we can get it out on share the links out on that. That's wonderful. Many congratulations and well deserved, Mr. McFarlane. Well deserved. So thank you very much. It's already 12:31 on the dot, so I better let everybody go now. But thank you and goodbye, everybody. Thank you so much for all of your contribution, and thank you, Sidney.
Thank you and goodbye. It's been a great.
Thank you.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
Thanks.